Welcome, everybody, to Uncontested with Sean Lohman, a podcast about simplifying the complicated world of estate planning so that you can start protecting your family's legacy today. Please welcome your estate planning expert and host, Sean Lohman. How are you doing today, Mr. Sean?
I'm great. How are you, Joel?
I'm doing very well. We want to welcome all of our listeners back to our very second episode. The first episode was super fun. We got to learn a little bit about Sean, his background, why he is an estate planning lawyer. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about what an estate planning lawyer is, what estate planning is in general, some of the nitty-gritty about those kinds of things, and potentially even why you need to consider perhaps having an estate planning lawyer. Some very important things to think about. So before we even get there, I think we need to step back, start from kind of the ground up. The question that I wanted to ask you first, Sean, was what is your estate?
Right. You know, people talk about estate planning and they have an idea of what it is, but and we'll get talking to people about that, and then suddenly somebody will look at me and say, well, what is an estate, by the way? And so it's important when you do this to sort of look at it from a bird's eye view and then sort of get closer into it. So an estate is everything that you own in your name.
Okay.
And only your name. So your home, your car, a boat, your clothes, your furniture, your jewelry, anything that you have that is in your individual name is your estate. So what's not in your estate? Anything that you own jointly with somebody else who is currently alive will bypass your estate.
Okay.
And all beneficiary designated assets. So retirement plans and life insurance policies are the two biggest beneficiary designated assets that most everybody has at some point. So you get the beneficiary designation form from your retirement plan or the beneficiary designation form from your life insurance, and you fill out who you want to have that. That bypasses your estate, and that goes directly to those individuals. So going back, your estate is anything that's in your individual name and anything that you yourself own.
So say like a house or something like that. Say that you have that your and your spouse's name on that house. Where would that?
When you die, it does not go through your estate. It goes immediately to your spouse. And we'll talk about this later. But that can be a good thing when you're married. But having other people's name on your property is not a good thing.
Yes.
And there's a lot of reasons behind that. So yes. So to answer your question simply is yes. If your spouse's name is on your house, then it bypasses your estate. It goes straight to your spouse. Then it's in your spouse's estate.
Interesting.
Because your spouse owns it by themselves, or your name may still be on it, but you're deceased. So it is only in your spouse's estate. Eventually, it's going to be in somebody's estate.
Wow, that is really interesting. So in your experience, and please, we invite you to go back and learn a little bit more about Sean from our first episode. But Sean's been doing this a while. He's been doing it for about 28 years. So in your experience, Sean, how I guess I would say versed is the average person about not only what their estate encompasses, but then what estate planning is in general?
I don't think very well, and I think there's a lot of attorneys who are not very well educated in this area of law. It's easy to go online and to pull a will or a power of attorney or a living will off of some form's website. It's also easy to go to a lawyer and to have the lawyer do essentially the same thing, where they have a will or a power of attorney that they do for every client that comes in. They just pull the former client's name off. They put the new client's name in. Some of them even have he/she. They don't even designate what gender the client is. And they charge you a little bit of money, and off you go. To handle what? To handle potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars?
Yeah.
It baffles me that that people would use a forms-based system to help somebody not only distribute and make a plan for their assets and their estate, but also for their children. Because your will also determines guardianships, how your children's money is spent, and things such as that. You can do that somewhat in a will. It's better done in a trust, and we'll talk about that in a future episode, but your basic estate planning documents, to just rely upon a form-based system, whether it's a form-based attorney or a form-based online, I'll tell you, I've seen it. I've seen disasters happen because of it. I really and truly have. An example.
Yeah.
Why would somebody need to contact an attorney? This is something that just happened within the past 2 weeks. A friend of mine, Shannon, who is from Kentucky and now lives in Florida, called me. And I hadn't talked to her in years. And she said, I need to ask you a question. She knows I do estate planning. And she said, tell me my accountant's wrong. Well, I don't normally tell people their accountant's wrong because they know a lot more about numbers than I do. But I said, okay, tell me what's going on. She said, my mom bought her house back in the 1960s in Florida. She paid $30,000 for it.
Oh, wow.
The house is now worth $430,000, which is not unusual. That's what happens over decades of owning a piece of property. But it's the only thing that her mom owned. It was the thing that she worked hardest for in her life. And she was so proud that she owned that home with no mortgage. She had 3 children, one of which was Shannon. She told Shannon, she said, I want to put the house in your name as well as mine because I don't want it to go through probate court. Again, we'll talk about that in a future episode, but she's right about that. You don't want to go through probate court if you don't have to. So she put the house in her daughter's name and mom's name. Mom dies. Shannon, by law, inherits the house. She goes to sell the house, sells it for $430,000, and is now ready to distribute the money between herself and her 2 siblings. So she's going to divide it 3 ways. She goes to the accountant. What does the accountant tell her? You owe capital gains taxes on $400,000. In other words, she owes over $120,000 to the government in taxes because of the sale of this house. Why is that? Because the basis of the house is the amount that you've paid for it. So it's $30,000. The $400,000 is capital gain. If she had called us, or if she had called any attorney, they would have told her, if you let the property go through your estate, your children are going to get a step up in basis to the value of your house as the date of death. So what would have happened if she had passed it by will, or even better, by trust? At the date of her mom's death, that house would have been worth, the basis on that house would have been $430,000, what it was worth. And when they sold it, they would have paid zero in capital gains taxes. She would have saved $120,000 for her children. That one asset, she didn't think she had enough money to do an estate plan. Apparently, she didn't think she had enough money to call a lawyer.
Yeah.
But imagine if she had spent a few $100s to sit down with somebody to go over her estate and to plan for her estate, a few $100 to save $120,000. Oh, it gets worse. So when Shannon pays her siblings $100,000 each, what is that? It's a gift. It's not from her mom's estate. It's a gift from Shannon to her siblings. Well, you can only gift so much money per year. So she had to fill out a gift tax return and file that with the federal government. What does that do? She doesn't have to pay anything on it right now, but at the end of Shannon's life, when she dies, that comes off her estate tax exemption. So she cannot pass as much money to her beneficiaries tax-free as she would have been able to had she not been caught up in this scheme of trying to bypass the system. You know, it's terrible.
Yeah.
And we see stories like that every day. people coming to us and walking in with plans that other people have drafted, and they say, my mom died, here's the estate plan. And it's a 3-page will, and we look at it and we say, well, we're off to probate court. That's going to be X amount of dollars in filing fees. That's going to be X amount of dollars in attorney fees. The executor is going to get 5% of the estate by law. And they say, well, when, we've got bills that are owed on my mom's house. We've got to pay the electricity. We've got to pay. And I tell them, you're going to have to pay that out of your pocket. And they look at me square in the eyes and they say, but my mom said she had everything taken care of. Dad said that we didn't have to worry about everything. Everything was in place. That's because somebody told them it was taken care of. Somebody told them this is all in place for your kids, but it's not.
Yeah.
So, people that fill in forms and have that kind of a practice, or if you go online and fill out forms, it's not a personalized plan that's tapered just for you.
Oh man.
That's what we do.
Yeah.
That's the difference between what other people do and what we do.
That's awesome. And I want to drill into that. I think my most pressing question, however, is, are you and Shannon still friends?
Absolutely.
Oh, good.
Absolutely. I couldn't tell her that the accountant was wrong. In fact, I said, your accountant is dead on. But I do tell, I've got so many stories like this over the years. This is the most recent that happened. And it's terrible.
Man.
Yeah.
So then we've made that comparison between just kind of the run of the mill, maybe your family lawyer or just some Yahoo that you know
right.
is filling out a couple forms for you. What is the correct, or what is your definition of what estate planning is from just a high level?
So an estate plan is a roadmap. It's a roadmap for your assets and for your family to take care of you during the course of your life, and to make sure that your family has an easy road when you are gone. Let's talk about while you're alive. And this is all part of estate planning. Who's going to care for you if you become incapacitated or disabled?
That wouldn't have anything to do with age either. That could be
It could be anything. It could be I walk out here and I have a car accident. I have a stroke. Something happens and I need somebody to decide who's going to be my doctor. If I require long-term care, where am I going to go? If somebody has to make a choice between hospice or no hospice, who's going to make that choice for me? Well, either I make it or the state makes the choice. Somebody has to petition the probate court, and some judge that doesn't know me or my family has to decide which person makes that choice for me. That's part of an estate plan. End-of-life decisions, a living will. Who's going to decide whether I get artificial food and hydration or if I don't get it? Who's going to decide if I get artificial life support or if I don't get it? What's in my best interest? Trust me, there's somebody that's going to petition the court for that.
Yeah.
And let me tell you that doctors and hospitals and the court do not necessarily think that one spouse has the other spouse's best interest. So it's not automatically the spouse. You can have a child and a spouse both petition the court to make those decisions. Many of the people listening to this would remember the Terry Shivo incident down in Florida. And this was back in the 90s. Terry Shivo was in her 30s and she got married, and she had a cardiac event that left her in a vegetative state, a persistent vegetative state. She had very little quality of life. Her husband said she never would have wanted to live. Terry would have wanted to be allowed to die. Her parents said, no. We know Terry. We know how she was brought up. We know her religious values. She never would have wanted to be allowed to die. She would have wanted to continue living. They fought for 10 years to the United States Supreme Court twice, President Bush got involved. The United States Congress got involved. Everybody in Florida got involved. Laws were passed. Decisions were made until the United States Supreme Court made a decision that said, we have determined that she would have wanted her husband to decide, and husband was allowed to decide, and Terry died, I don't know, weeks later. 10 years they fought over this because she didn't fill out a very simple form called a living will, designating who was going to make those decisions. So that's part of estate planning.
Yeah.
And then when that time comes that you do pass away, how do you keep your family out of court and out of conflict to keep them from fighting? So, probate court's expensive and it takes time. 6 months in Kentucky, can't do anything for 6 months. You have to sit and wait for creditors to make claims against your estate. That's all it's there for. Probate is where your estate spends its money to file a lawsuit against you, basically.
Yeah.
And it makes all of your assets have to sit there for 6 months while it's being broadcast to everyone. John Smith has passed away. If he owed you money, you have 6 months to make a claim against this estate in court, and that's the first thing that's going to get paid. So, 6 months, attorney's fees, a 5% statutory executor's fee. It's public. So anybody can go down and pull the file and see what your estate was worth and see what you were worth. Even worse, my daughter's boyfriends or girlfriends could go down to the courthouse and pull the file and see what the person that they're interested in is now going to be worth.
Wow.
It's wide open. And so, how do I keep that from happening to my kids? How do I keep my family private? How do I let them, in the comfort of a conference room, transfer my assets rather than doing it in open court with some stranger sitting up there making all of these decisions for me?
And I would imagine this is also localized as well. So would that probate court have to happen in the state in which the
that's
individual...
that's a really good question. It happens here. And how many times do I have clients that have property out of state? A lot. Well, if you die without a will, or if you die with just a will in place, if you own property outside the state of Kentucky, you have to probate your estate in every state in which you own property. So my brother, for example, he's a rich doctor, and he has a house in Tennessee, he has a house in Ohio, he has a house in Kentucky. He would have to probate his estate in 3 different states, which means 3 different lawyers, which means you have to have local representation as far as the executor from out of state cannot be the person. You got to appoint a local person to receive service from the probate courts, and you have to go through that whole process that I just explained in 3 different venues.
Wow.
It is terrible. I had a client come in recently. Another story. Here you go. Had a client come in recently. His mom died here in Kentucky, but she owned land down in Florida. It took over a year for the Florida case to be probated.
Wow.
And we were finished up here. We sold the house. Everything was done. Not a problem. Down in Florida, oh my gosh, what a pain. If they had a different estate plan in place, they could have avoided all of that. They wouldn't have had to file probate in either state. So that's important. And then, most importantly of all, let's talk about what happens to our children. Because if you die without an estate plan that you've prepared, there's still an estate plan.
Yeah.
It's the state's plan. The state has the intestate statutes that govern what happens to your stuff if you die without a plan in place. And if you die with a spouse and children, for example, your spouse doesn't get everything. Doesn't happen. It gets divided between your spouse and your kids. But what happens to your children? Well, anything that you would leave to your children would go to them, and your will can control when your children get their assets, when your children would be able to control their own money and things like that. But remember we talked before about beneficiary designated assets? Your will does not control any of those things. So if I leave life insurance to my child, which is frequently done, you can imagine, or if I leave my retirement plan to my child or my children, which again is frequently done, and I die while one or all of them are still minors, the court would oversee that money until they're 18. And guess what happens on their 18th birthday? They get a big whopping check for everything that has been building up during all those years that they were minors. Doesn't matter if they're in high school still. Doesn't matter at what stage of life they're in. It doesn't matter if they are dependent upon drugs. It doesn't matter if they have a usurious boyfriend or girlfriend who's going to try to take every penny that they have. They are handed a check at the age of 18 for everything that was outside of that will.
Wow.
That it was outside of your estate. So you may think, I went to a lawyer and the lawyer said everything that goes through my estate doesn't get paid to my child till they're 21, and my brother is going to oversee all of that, so all of my stuff is safe. Well, that's true for everything that goes through your estate, but a lot of us have more assets that are going to bypass our estate than ever see the inside of a probate court.
Wow.
So there's so much at risk when it involves our children and the assets that are going to be paid to them. And I've seen more children's lives ruined over the years because they inherited large sums of money at the age of 18. They never end up graduating from college. They'll go to college, but then I promise you, they'll spend all the money they have on spring breaks for them and their friends, on buying everybody drinks at the bar. They'll drive great cars. They'll give great gifts. And they also spend everything they had and fail out of school. And I'm telling you, I have never seen it work out for a kid. I wish that was not the case. I wish I could tell you that there's responsible kids out there that do differently. We may think our kids are incredibly responsible at the age of 17 and 18. It doesn't matter what we think.
I was not.
They are still kids. Can you imagine the car you would have had at the age of 18 if somebody had handed you a check for $100,000?
Yeah.
Imagine what you would have had if somebody handed you a check for $500,000 or even more. A lot of people have $1 million life insurance policies. What happens if you die and your kid's 10 years old? What does that grow into? And when they're 18 years old, you're going to give them a check for that amount of money. It will ruin their lives. So estate planning is this roadmap that not only helps you while you're alive, but it plans for your kids, for your family, for your spouse, for everybody that you love, and protects them down the road. And it allows you to control how that money is spent for them, for their health, their education, their maintenance, and their support for years down the road. And it keeps the money that you worked hard for from being squandered by irresponsible people, to put it quite frankly.
Man, and it's unfortunate that has to be a part of the equation, but
it happens.
It is so important.
Joel, it happens all the time. And, and we have people that come back to us and they just look at us and they think, what happened? Where did that money go that I got?
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate.
Yeah. I guess I'm curious, is there a couple different phases? Like obviously like I'm about 30. I could come to you and get all this plan set out right now. Are there people that can still come to you maybe after it's a little bit too late still and get kind of help, some help? Like what can you do for people that potentially haven't prepared as much as they should have?
For basic estate planning, and that leads to another question of, what stage in life or how much money do I have to have or how many assets do I have to have in order for you to help me? There's no limit. I mean, there's no, we don't say, oh, you can't come to us if you don't have more than $50,000 in assets. That's not in any way accurate. I have done more plans in the last year for 25 to 30-year-old couples.
Wow.
Well, let me correct that. I have done as many plans for 25 to 30-year-old couples as I have for 55 and up.
Wow.
So for basic estate planning, and that's where we look at your assets and your beneficiary designated assets, and we look at how everything would play out should something happen to you and your spouse, and what can we do to make that better, whether it's through a basic will plan or whether it's through a little bit more advanced planning, a revocable living trust plan. There's really no end to when we can do that. One of my favorite clients was this guy who came in, John, with his oldest son, and he had 5 children, and he was dying. He literally died within 2 weeks, I think, 2 to 3 weeks of when he was in my office.
Wow.
Of cancer. And he was a single dad. I could completely relate to him, and it broke my heart. We could not do incredibly advanced planning for him. But we were able to get a will in place. We were able to help him determine who was going to be his executor, how we were going to protect the assets for his children that were under 18, because he had some under 18, some adult children. Just a super guy. So he came in, and we were able to get that done. We've been in hospital rooms doing wills. So it's never too late until it's really too late.
Too late. But it's never too early, it would seem.
However, we in our elder law planning, and we'll do some episodes on that down the road, but in our elder law planning, where you're trying to help protect people's assets from Medicaid consideration and long-term care issues and all of that, yes, then it can be too late. So, and then you're into crisis planning, and there's different plans that you try to do to help people protect their assets from being completely exhausted on long-term care. So yes, those people need to come in. I tell people, I was with a couple last night I was delivering a plan to them, and they asked about that very thing. They said, so when should we start thinking about long-term care, and when should we start thinking about how to protect our assets from Medicaid, and in case one of us ends up in a nursing home? And I tell people, once you're 65, if you come into my office for basic estate planning and you are 65 or older, we're going to have a conversation about Medicaid protection, Medicaid asset protection, protecting everything that you've worked hard for from Medicaid, and forcing Medicaid to pay for those long-term care benefits rather than exhausting everything in your estate and just watching it dwindle down to nothing because you need long-term care.
Yeah.
So yes, for older people, yes, it can be too late. For younger people or people who are not looking at imminent long-term care, people's 70s, 80s, 90s, no, it's not too late.
Yeah.
We can put a plan in place anytime.
Yeah, that's great. And I guess obviously it's important to think about you and your own. It's important to think about your own personal plan. It's important to think about what you're going to be leaving to your children. How important is it? And I guess I'm sure you meet these people along the way, but how important is it to be thinking about these plans for your aging parents?
Oh, wow. It's a conversation. I do this. I do a newsletter in some community magazines, and I always talk about this around the holidays. And I always say, ask your aging parent, ask your grandparent, do you have a plan in place? You don't have to ask them what's in the plan. In fact, it's none of your business what's in the plan. But as long as they have a plan, that's what you need to know. And if it is your grandparent, or if it's somebody who's starting to show signs of decline, whether it's physical decline or, most importantly, probably mental decline, because at some point you may not be in a position that you have testamentary capacity. Ask those people, do you have a plan in place in case you require long-term care? Because, if you don't have a plan in place, everything that you have is subject to be sold or to be spent on your long-term care. And if that's what you want, that's fine. But if it's not what you want, you need to go to talk to somebody about Medicaid asset protection planning.
Man.
Otherwise known as elder law. People call it elder law. And so, but you need to talk to somebody about elder law planning.
Yeah. Wow.
And it is very different from planning for somebody like you that's in their 30s as opposed to somebody who's in their 80s.
Mm-hmm.
I have to say, they get it. The 80-year-olds get it. And when they're looking at their bank accounts and they're looking at everything that they've worked so hard for, they want to protect that for people that are your age.
Yeah.
And we can help them do that. 100% we can help them do that.
Bouncing off that, and I think this is maybe where we can leave this episode. This is important stuff. This is obviously important stuff, and I appreciate Sean, just your ability to speak passionately about it, to give real world examples of why these things matter, how they affect people in the real world. And so I guess my question would be, why do we need to come see you? Why do we need to come see people that work in the same field that you do? Like, is this something that I could just get on Google and search a few things, find some documents that I could fill out on some government website somewhere and do? Or is this something that I truly do need to come see you? I think I know the answer to that question already, because I'm a little like, this exposes some areas of unpreparedness in my own life.
Sure.
I have 2 young children. So this is important to me. Do we come and see you? Can we do it ourselves? That's the question.
What you have to remember is this is not about you. This is about the people that you love the most. It's about your spouse. It's about your children, because they're the ones that are going to know whether your plan works when it needs to work, not you.
Yeah.
So you have to go to an attorney that you trust, knows what they are doing.
Yeah.
Who focuses on this, who doesn't just do a forms-based practice. And for goodness sakes, don't rely on the internet, because forms off of the internet aren't listening to what you have. They're not listening to you talk about your children, what your wishes are for your children. When do you want your children to have their assets? What kind of people are they? That's the kind of thing that a lawyer who does what I do can provide you. It's a tailor-made plan for you and for your family. So people who are out there that are tuned in today, and you as you're sitting here, you're thinking about your children and you're thinking about your spouse, and people out there may be thinking about their grandchildren or their niece or their nephew or somebody who's important in their life. That is what this is about. It's not about them. That's who they are doing this for, to protect them. And also for yourself while you're alive, to make sure that you live as comfortable a life as you possibly can, and that you leave some sort of legacy for those that you leave behind, and keep them out of court and keep them out of conflict. That's what provides us with a good life. We can move on in our lives knowing that everything is taken care of, and that our children and our spouse and those that we love are taken care of should something happen to us and should we not be there for them.
Well, you have me completely and totally convinced, Mr. Sean. And for
there's one person.
Yeah. Well, yeah, for all of you out there that don't read the instructions when you're putting together your IKEA furniture and try and diagnose all of your illnesses on WebMD, which I'm sure is supported by a group of very lovely people. This is one of those important things.
It is very important.
This is one of those things where you need to come to somebody like Sean that knows what he's doing, that has experience, and is able to guide you through, as he said, a tailor-made solution for some of the most important questions you need to be asking.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very good.
Sean, thank you so much for coming into the studio today, teaching us about all this stuff. And we want to thank you, our listeners, for listening to another episode of Uncontested with Sean Lohman. We are always looking for just new questions that you might have, new topics that we need to address. So please reach out if you have any of those questions. We want to continue to simplify the complicated world of estate planning for you. And of course, all of our social links will be in the show description. Please like and subscribe, and join us again next time for more great conversation and practical insights from our good friend Sean Lohman. Thanks so much for listening.